March 3rd, 1945, 11:47 a.m. The skies above the Bielefeld Railway Viaduct, Nazi Germany. The air raid sirens had gone silent. For the German defenders stationed below, this was the most terrifying sound of all, the absence of warning. High above at 21,000 feet. A formation of RAF Lancaster bombers approached their target with calculated precision. But these weren't ordinary bombing runs. Inside the bomb bays of 19 Lancasters hung something the world had never seen used in combat before. The Tallboy, a 5-ton earthquake bomb, now equipped with experimental radar guidance systems that would change warfare forever. Squadron leader John Woodruff checked his instruments one final time. The viaduct below, a critical artery for German military transport, had survived 32 previous bombing attempts. Today, that would change. The ground crews had spent all night fitting the new ANA PQ-7 Eagle radar guidance systems to a select number of bombs. As Woodruff's navigator called out the coordinates, the bombardier's scope showed something unprecedented. A real-time radar image of the target, updating every 2 seconds, immune to the thick cloud cover that had protected the viaduct for months. If you're fascinated by the technological turning points that changed World War II forever, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Drop a comment below telling us which military innovation you'd like us to cover next. Now, let's dive into one of the war's most revolutionary and devastating. The moment the first Tallboy dropped. Equipped with its primitive but functional radar seeker head, the era of blind bombing ended. The weapon fell through 10,000 feet of cloud cover, its internal radar system making micro adjustments to its tail fins. Guiding it toward the strongest radar returned the massive stone and steel structure below. At 11:52 a.m., the bomb struck with pinpoint accuracy, penetrating deep into the earth before detonating. The resulting seismic shock wave, equivalent to a 4.1 magnitude earthquake, didn't just destroy the viaduct, it liquefied the soil beneath it, causing 7 massive arches to collapse into the crater like dominoes. But this was just the beginning of radar-guided bombing's terrifying potential. The development of radar-guided munitions didn't begin with Allied innovation, it began with desperation. By 1943, the combined bomber offensive had dropped over 300,000 tons of bombs on strategic German targets. Yet, reconnaissance photos revealed a disturbing truth. Less than 20% of bombs landed within 5 miles of their intended targets. The famous Butt report of 1941 had exposed an even more sobering reality. 1 in 3 aircraft actually found their target area at night. And of those, merely 1 in 5 dropped their bombs within 5 miles of the aiming point. This meant that the vast majority of the Allied bombing campaign was essentially hitting empty countryside, while crews believed they were destroying factories and rail yards. The human cost was staggering. Bomber Command alone suffered over 55,000 casualties, the highest loss rate of any British military service, and much of that sacrifice was yielding minimal strategic results. American and British scientists knew they needed a revolution in bombing accuracy. The answer came from an unlikely place. The same radar technology being used to detect enemy aircraft could be adapted to guide bombs to their targets. The concept was elegantly simple, yet fiendishly difficult to execute. A radar transmitter would be mounted in the nose of a bomb, sending out radio waves that would bounce off the target below. The return signal would be analyzed by a primitive analog computer maze of vacuum tubes. Resistors. A mechanical servostat would calculate the necessary adjustments and move control surfaces on the bomb's fins. The challenge was miniaturizing this technology to fit inside a weapon that would be subjected to the extreme forces of being dropped from an aircraft traveling at 200 miles per hour, then guiding itself while falling at terminal velocity. The British developed the Blue Boar program, while Americans pushed forward with Project Azon and later Raison for range and Azon. The first successful test of an American radio-controlled bomb came in May 1943 at Eglin Field, Florida, when a modified 1,000-pound general-purpose bomb was guided to strike within 15 feet of a target tank from an altitude of 10,000 feet. The test observers stood in stunned silence as they watched the bomb make visible course corrections during its descent, actually curving through the air to strike the target. One engineer later recalled, "We had just witnessed the future of warfare, and it was terrifying." The implications were immediately clear. If bombing accuracy could be increased from 20% to even 60 or 70%, the entire strategic bombing campaign could be transformed from a weapon of attrition into a surgical instrument. But the technology faced enormous obstacles. Early radar seekers couldn't distinguish between the target and surrounding terrain. They were vulnerable to jamming. The guidance systems frequently failed due to the tremendous shock of being released from the aircraft. And perhaps most critically, they required clear weather of specific types of targets that provided strong radar returns. Metal structures like bridges and railway viaducts were ideal. Dense forests or camouflaged targets were nearly invisible to the primitive radar systems. The first combat use of guided bombs would require perfect conditions and a target so strategically vital that failure was unacceptable. The German war machine in early 1945 was a wounded beast, but it was far from dead. Despite the advancing Allied armies on both fronts, Nazi Germany's interior rail network continued to function with remarkable efficiency, moving troops, weapons, and supplies to the battle. The Bielefeld Viaduct was a crucial node in this network, carrying the main rail line between the industrial Ruhr Valley and the rest of Germany. Allied intelligence had identified it as a Category 1 target. Its destruction would immediately and significantly impact German military operations. But the viaduct had proven almost impossible to destroy using conventional bombing methods. Its 24 massive stone arches were over 90 feet tall and built with such structural redundancy that even direct hits had failed to collapse the structure. German engineers had also positioned it in a valley where morning fog and afternoon cloud cover provided natural protection from visual bombing. Previous raids had cratered the surrounding area, killed dozens of German soldiers, and forced laborers working to repair damage, but the viaduct itself remained operational. RAF Bomber Command assigned the task to No. 9 Squadron and No. 617 Squadron, and the legendary dam busters who had breached the Eder dams 2 years earlier with Barnes Wallace's bouncing bombs. Now they would carry another of Wallace's creations, the Tallboy, a 21-foot streamlined bomb weighing 12,000 pounds, filled with 5,200 pounds of Torpax explosive. The Tallboy wasn't designed to hit targets directly. It was an earthquake bomb, designed to penetrate deep into the earth beside a structure and create a massive underground explosion that would destabilize the foundations. But for the Bielefeld mission, several Tallboys would be fitted with the experimental American APQ-7 radar guidance system, making them the first truly smart bombs in history. The morning of March 3, 1945, dawned cold and overcast at Harfootholspa in Lincolnshire. Ground crews had worked through the night, carefully installing the radar guidance packages into selected Tallboys. The technology was so new and classified that only a handful of technicians had clearance to work on it. Each guidance system cost roughly $50,000, equivalent to over $850,000 today, making each bomb more expensive than the Lancaster carrying it. The systems were delicate, temperamental, and had only been tested a handful of times. Flight crews received minimal briefing about the new technology, told only that these special weapons would guide themselves better than usual and to maintain precise altitude and heading during the bomb run. At 8:30 a.m., 19 Lancaster bombers took off in loose formation, climbing into the overcast sky. Each aircraft carried a single Tallboy. The bomb was so heavy that Lancasters had to be specially modified, with armor removed and fuel loads calculated to the gallon to get the massive weapons airborne. The flight across the North Sea was routine, but as they crossed into German airspace, the reality of their mission became clear. Despite Germany's crumbling air defenses, scattered Luftwaffe fighters still posed a threat, and the predicted cloud cover was, if anything, thicker than anticipated. At 11:30 a.m., as they approached the target area, the cloud deck below was completely solid at 8,000 feet. Under normal circumstances, this would have forced a mission abort, but this chimney, they had radar. Squadron leader Woodruff's bomb aimer, flying officer Jim stared at his H-2S radar scope as they began their bombing run. The green phosphorescent display showed the landscape below as abstract blobs of light and shadow, but the massive stone viaduct appeared as a bright linear return cutting across the scope. The new guidance systems in the Tallboys would lock onto this return signal once released. The formation had spread out to avoid mid-air collisions, each bomber executing its run individually. At 11:47 a.m., Woodruff's Lancaster steadied on its heading. The bomb bay doors opened, and Castagnola called out, "Steady, ... steady, ... Bomb is gone." The Tallboy fell away, its radar seeker activating 3 seconds after release. Inside the bomb's nose, vacuum tubes warmed up, and the transmitter began sending pulses. The primitive computer began analyzing returns, identifying the strongest signal, and making its calculations. Small electric motors whirred, adjusting the bomb's tail fins in tiny increments. From the ground, German observers saw nothing through the clouds, just heard the distinctive deep drone of the Merlin engines high above. The first indication that something was different came when the tall boy emerged from the cloud base at 7,000 feet, clearly angling toward the viaduct rather than following a ballistic arc. One German soldier later recalled, "It looked like it was thinking the way it moved through the air. We knew immediately this was something new." The impact came at 11:52 m. The tall boy struck the ground 35 feet from the base of the 7th arch, bearing itself 60 feet down before its delayed fuse triggered. The explosion that followed was unlike anything conventional bombs produced. The ground heaved upward in a dome 50 feet high before collapsing inward, creating a crater 90 feet across and 40 feet deep. The seismic wave propagated through the soil like a tsunami through water, striking the viaduct's foundation with incredible force. The 7th arch cracked, then collapsed. The 6th and 8th arches, suddenly supporting weight they weren't designed for, began to fail. Within 30 seconds, 7 consecutive arches had collapsed into the crater, creating a 200-foot gap in the structure. It was catastrophic. Surgical destruction achieved through clouds with a single bomb, but the other 80 Lancasters were still making their runs. Over the next 12 minutes, 16 more tall boys fell toward the already devastated viaduct. 3 were equipped with the radar guidance systems, and these 3 struck with unnerving accuracy, widening the destruction. The other conventional tall boys dropped using traditional H2S radar marking, created a pattern of massive craters around the target, devastating but less precise. One radar-guided bomb actually struck an intact arch directly, the first recorded instance of a bomb hitting a bridge structure while falling through complete cloud cover. The arch exploded in a shower of stone and steel, adding to the destruction. By noon, the Bielefeld Viaduct, which had survived 32 previous bombing raids, was utterly obliterated. German engineers estimated it would take 6 months to rebuild, time Nazi Germany didn't have. The rail line was severed, cutting off a crucial supply route during Germany's final desperate weeks. The success at Bielefeld didn't remain isolated. Within weeks, radar-guided bombs were being used across Germany with devastating effect. On March 14, 1945, the Arnsberg Railway Viaduct was destroyed by 12 Tallboys, 4 of them radar-guided in a single raid through heavy overcast. On March 21st, the Nürnberg Bridge over the Weser River was struck by 3 radar-guided weapons in succession, each finding the structure despite thick morning fog. The statistical difference was stark. Conventional bombing raids against bridges achieved roughly a 15% hit rate. Raids using radar-guided bombs achieved hit rates exceeding 70%. German defenders reported a new kind of psychological terror, knowing that clouds no longer protected them, that bombs could now hunt through whether that had once been their ally. The technology's limitations became apparent as well. Radar-guided bombs worked brilliantly against large, distinct targets like bridges and viaducts, but struggled against targets that blended with surrounding terrain. A raid against German tank formations near Paderborn in late March resulted in disappointing results. The radar systems couldn't distinguish between tanks and nearby buildings, and several bombs guided themselves to farm structures instead. The systems were also vulnerable to jamming. German engineers, after recovering unexploded examples of the guided bombs, quickly developed crude radar jamming equipment. By early April 1945, some German defensive positions were equipped with transmitters that broadcast on the guidance system's frequencies, effectively blinding the bombs. However, with Germany collapsing and resources exhausted, these countermeasures were deployed too little and too late. The human cost of this technological leap was measured not just in German casualties, which were significant as defenders and forced laborers working near rail infrastructure were caught in the precisely targeted devastation, but in the Allied bomber crews, who no longer had to make repeated, increasingly dangerous runs against the same targets. The survival rate for RAF bomber command crews improved measurably in the war's final months, partly due to diminishing German defenses, but also because missions succeeded on first attempts rather than requiring return trips. Fewer missions meant fewer opportunities for anti-aircraft fire, fighter interceptions, or mechanical failures to claim aircraft and crews. The technology also raised disturbing questions about warfare's future. At a March 1945 meeting at RAF Highwick, Air Marshal Arthur Bomber Harris reviewed reconnaissance photos of the Bielefeld raid. His comment was recorded in meeting minutes. "We have crossed the threshold. When bombs can guide themselves to targets through any weather, at any time, what defense remains? What cities will be safe?" The gathered officers sat in uncomfortable silence. They were looking at photographs of a technology that would define aerial warfare for the next 80 years. The principles demonstrated by those first radar-guided tallboys: a sensor identifying the target, a computer calculating corrections, control surfaces making adjustments, remain the foundation of every guided munition used today, from precision bombs to cruise missiles to hypersonic weapons. The strategic impact of guided bombs in World War II was ultimately limited by timing. They arrived too late to significantly alter the war's outcome. But their tactical impact was profound. In the war's final 10 weeks, Allied forces using radar-guided weapons destroyed more strategic bridges and rail infrastructure than in the previous 6 months of conventional bombing. German military logistics are already strained to breaking point, collapsed entirely in many regions. Units cut off from resupply surrendered faster. Counterattacks couldn't be mounted because troops and tanks couldn't reach the front. The Third Reich's final collapse was accelerated by precision weapons that severed its circulatory system with surgical cuts. The technology's proliferation after the war was explosive. Both American and Soviet forces captured. German research into guided weapons, including the more advanced Fritz X and H's 293 radio-guided bombs Germany had used against Allied shipping, combined with the Allied radar guidance technology. Post-war weapons development focused intensely on guided munitions. By the Korean War, just 5 years later, American forces were using radio-controlled raison bombs with considerable success. By Vietnam, laser-guided bombs achieved accuracy measured in feet rather than miles. By the Gulf War in 1991, guided weapons accounted for less than 10% of munitions used, but achieved the vast majority of successful target destructions. Today, virtually all military aircraft carry primarily or exclusively guided weapons. The era of dropping dumb bombs and hoping they land near the target has been relegated to history. The engineers and scientists who developed these first guided weapons understood they were opening Pandora's box. Dr. Luis Alvarez, who worked on the American guided bomb program and would later win the Nobel Prize in Physics, wrote in his memoir, "We were solving an engineering problem, how to make bombs hit their target spot. We were creating a strategic problem. What happens when any target can be hit, anytime, anywhere? We were making war more efficient, which paradoxically might make it more frequent." This tension between technological capability and strategic wisdom continues to define military ethics today. The specific fate of those who participated in the Bielefeld raid varied. Squadron leader Woodruff survived the war and later worked as a test pilot. His bomb aimer, Jean Cassec, returned to California and never spoke publicly about the mission until the 1970s, when radar-guided weapons had been declassified. Of the 19 Lancaster crews that flew that day, 18 survived the war, a remarkably high survival rate for Bomber Command crews, who suffered a 44% casualty rate overall. The 19th crew was lost in a raid on Bremen 2 weeks later. Killed not by enemy action, but by a mid-air collision in thick clouds, a reminder that even revolutionary technology couldn't eliminate all of war's random cruelty. The Bielefeld Viaduct itself remained a ruin until 1948, when reconstruction began under the Marshall Plan. The new structure, completed in 1950, incorporated some of the original stone arches that had survived monuments to their builder's skill and to the destructive precision that had finally defeated them. Today, trains still cross the viaduct daily, and a small memorial plaque notes its wartime destruction. Though it doesn't mention the technological watershed that occurred there. Most passengers crossing the bridge have no idea they're passing over the site where warfare changed forever. The broader lesson of radar-guided bombing extends beyond military history into the realm of technological determinism, the idea that technology, once developed, will inevitably be used and refined regardless of ethical considerations. The same technology that allowed Allied forces to destroy strategic targets with minimal civilian casualties also enabled future precision strikes that raised complex questions about when and how military force should be applied. If any target can be hit with near certainty, does that lower the threshold for military action? Does precision make war more humane by reducing collateral damage, or more frequent by making it seem surgically clean? These questions were far from the minds of those Lancaster crews on March 3, 1945. They were focused on the immediate mission: destroy the viaduct, survive the mission, return home. They succeeded on all counts, but in doing so, they demonstrated a technology that would reshape warfare for generations. The raid on Bielefeld wasn't just another tactical success in the final months of World War II. It was the moment when weapons stopped being dumb objects flung at targets and became intelligent systems capable of hunting and destroying with minimal human intervention. In the decades since, guided weapons have become exponentially more sophisticated. Modern munitions use GPS satellites, inertial navigation, imaging, infrared sensors, and millimeter wave radar to identify and strike targets with accuracy measured in inches. Some weapons can identify specific vehicles in a convoy or specific windows in a building. The latest generation can loiter over a battlefield, identify targets, and strike without human intervention, though international conventions currently require a human in the loop for targeting decisions. The technological trajectory from those primitive radar-guided tallboys to today's autonomous weapon systems is clear, and it raises profound questions about the future of warfare and the role of human judgment in lethal decisions. Yet there remains something uniquely significant about those first radar-guided bombs. They represented humanity's first step toward delegating not just the execution of violence, but the targeting of violence to machines. Every guided weapon since, from the laser-guided bombs that struck Iraqi bunkers in 19 to the drone-launched missiles striking terrorist targets, to traces its lineage back to those tall boys falling through the clouds over Germany in March 1945, making subtle adjustments to their flight path, hunting their targets with primitive but effective electronic mines. If this deep dive into World War II's technological turning points fascinated you, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. These stories of innovation under pressure, of engineering marvels born from necessity, shape the world we live in today. What technological breakthrough from World War II should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below. The sky above Bielefeld is quiet now, 8 decades later. Commercial aircraft pass overhead daily. There are radar guidance systems, descendants of that wartime technology, safely navigating passengers to destinations around the world. The same principles that guided bombs to destruction now guide millions of people to safety. It's a fitting irony that a technology born to destroy with unprecedented precision now serves primarily to protect and connect, but the potential for its destructive application remains, more potent than ever, waiting in the arsenals of nations around the world. A reminder that some technological thresholds, once crossed, can never be uncrossed.